Ancient Greek mythology is so embedded in Western art, literature, and pop culture, it's easy to forget that many of the stories are bafflingly strange. They tend to leave the weirder stuff out of the movies, which is why Hercules doesn't bludgeon his music teacher with a lyre in the Disney film. Oh yeah, that happened. And there's even stranger tales where that came from. So, today on Weird History, we're looking at the weirdest, most disturbing stories from Greek mythology. But first, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel, and then jump down into the comments and let us know your favorite character from ancient myths and folklore. Now, who's ready for a one-way ticket to Mount Olympus? The ancient Greeks believed that, in the very beginning, the world was a void of nothingness, referred to as chaos. Then light appeared, followed by the deities Gaia and Uranus. Gaia and Uranus then had 12 children, known as the Titans. It is unclear whether they went to play for Tennessee or Denzel Washington. Two of these Titans, Kronos and his sister Rhea, got married and had 6 children of their own, essentially birthing a new class of gods. And if immortal brothers and sisters getting together weirds you out, don't worry, it only gets weirder. Soon after, Kronos descended into paranoia, becoming convinced his powerful children were going to whack him and take control of the young world. So he did what any reasonable father would do. He devoured them all, one by one, like little Kit Kat bars. Gulp. Literally. Rhea managed to save just one of her godchildren, Zeus, who managed to escape Kronos and grow up in secret. Once he reached adulthood, Zeus returned, found Kronos, and forced him to vomit up all his baby siblings, who were somehow still alive. Remember, they were all immortal, so Kronos had essentially swallowed them for safekeeping, like when they shoved Magneto into that plastic jail at the end of X-Men. So while Zeus's siblings were stoked to be released, they also still had to spend years bored out of their minds in their father's stomach. In other words, it was a mixed bag. What followed was an extended battle between Zeus and his cool young siblings and the crusty old Titans. Eventually, Zeus won and became the lead god on Mount Olympus, while Kronos was chopped up into pieces and thrown into the underworld known as Tartarus. That'll teach him. Zeus plays a role in many famous myths, many of which center on his tendency to disguise his appearance and seduce just about every kind of being and creature, from gods and demigods to mortals and animals. And sometimes he'd even disguise himself as an animal to woo a person. Don't kink shame. In one particularly nasty myth, Zeus admired a human woman named Leda from afar. Zeus transformed himself into a swan and proceeded to either seduce or attack Leda, depending on the version of the myth you read. Because she was also married to her human husband, Spartan king Tyndareus, Leda somehow became double pregnant, because we really didn't understand reproductive biology at the time. Hence this elaborate story involving a shape-shifting swan. Leda gave birth to both Zeus's children, Helen and Polydeuces, along with Tyndareus' offspring, Castor and Clytemnestra. 4 kids. That's like twins times 2, or triplets plus 1. That's just going to make for some mighty expensive birthdays. Just think of how much they had to spend on party clowns alone. In some versions of the story, Leda laid an actual egg from which Zeus's daughter Helen hatched. And this is actually the same Helen who goes on to become Helen of Troy, whose beauty inspired the love triangle that started the Trojan War. Sadly, Homer's Iliad doesn't mention whether she knew she was half swan. No! Zeus, the king of gods, takes on a supporting role in the story of Ixion, the king of an ancient tribe known as the Lapiths. After Ixion's father-in-law stole some of his horses, Ixion threw him into a bed of burning coals and wood. This is often considered the first act of kin-slaying in Greek mythology, and led Ixion's own people to shun him, forcing him to live as an outlaw. At least he didn't flinch while flipping a water bottle. Zeus took pity on Ixion and brought him to stay in Mount Olympus. But rather than being grateful to old Thunderbolts for saving his life, Ixion immediately began pining over Zeus's wife, Hera. Zeus responded by making a Hera-shaped cloud, and convinced Ixion to sleep with the cloud lady instead of the real thing, which does sound like a good plan. Wait, no it doesn't, but it does sound like a plan. Shockingly, the cloud scheme backfired, after Ixion somehow managed to get the cloud pregnant. Listen, We told you mythology was weird. And Cloud Hera, Clara, gave birth to Centaurus, who mated with a bunch of horses and fathered the line of mythical creatures known as centaurs. The whole ordeal made Zeus so angry that he banished Ixion from Olympus and had him bound to a winged, fiery wheel that was always spinning, causing him to be perpetually burned. Moral of the story? Don't accidentally create centaurs by making a cloud wife to trick your buddy. Explanations differ for the origins of Pan, god of the wild, shepherds, and music. By some accounts, he was the child of the god Hermes and an unknown mortal woman. But others claim he was the protege of Hermes and Penelope, the wife of famed Trojan warrior Odysseus. And different authors still insist that, as Penelope kept company with over 100 suitors during Odysseus' time away, there's no real way to know the actual identity of his father. Maury Povich wasn't around yet, so who could say for sure? Regardless, Pan, like Zeus before him, became notable for his insatiable appetite for bumpin' uglies. In one story, Pan was pursuing the nymph Syrinx, even though she was just not that into him. Pan, who by the way is a satyr, probably should have mentioned that, kept chasing Syrinx, who eventually realized he was unrelenting. So she ran into the woods and begged the river god to transform her into something that Pan couldn't possibly be attracted to, which turned out to be a bunch of reeds. But anyone who thought Pan would give up that easily did not know Pan. He was so determined to possess Syrinx, even in reed form, that he cut her down and used her stalks to make a musical instrument, which we'd today refer to as the pan flute. Erysichthon was the king of Thessaly, a mountainous region of ancient Greece. And in one particularly perilous tale, Erysichthon took 20 men to a sacred grove belonging to Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and agriculture. The king ordered his men to chop down a black poplar tree that was beloved by the nymphs for gathering and dancing. He planned to use the wood to expand his home and add on a new feast hall. Had Erysichthon never seen an Avatar movie? You don't cut down a big tree. That's just asking for trouble. The myth says that the tree actually groaned in a human voice on the first chop, which was the first bad sign for Erysichthon. For some reason, this did not persuade him to stop chopping. Then Demeter herself took human form and visited the king, warning him to not chop down that tree, or he'd risk incurring the goddess's wrath. Again, he ignored what really should have been enough of a warning, and he kept on chopping. Demeter, back in goddess form now, hooked up with another angry god, Dionysus, and cursed Erysichthon with insatiable, unquenchable hunger and thirst. Eventually, the king's appetite grew so excessive he burned through his entire treasury, and even attempted to sell his own daughter for food. And in some retellings of the tale, Erysichthon ends up devouring his own body from extreme hunger, until nothing was left. Guess those Snickers commercials were right. You're not you when you're hungry. Another tale featuring Dionysus centers on a mortal named Lycurgus, who was the leader of the Edoni tribe in Thrace, which is in the modern-day Balkans. Lycurgus disliked Dionysus and had banned worship of the god throughout his realm. So when he heard Dionysus had taken human form and was actually wandering around his domain, he set about arresting Big D's worshippers. This so angered Dionysus, he decided to punish his enemy with madness. Lycurgus then mistook his own son for a mature trunk of ivy, a plant considered holy to Dionysus and his followers, and axed him along with the rest of his family. Dionysus then told the people of Thrace that, until their king was properly punished, he would make the land barren, causing a famine. So in one common form of the tale, the people fed Lycurgus to a band of man-eating horses. In other versions, Lycurgus just removes his own feet and legs. Either way, you come at Dionysus, you best not miss. Speaking of, Dionysus' origin story is plenty wild too. The god of wine and good times was the result of Zeus's affair with a mortal princess named Semele, to whom the god had promised to grant any possible wish. Zeus's wife, Hera, was resentful of the union, so she went to Earth and encouraged Semele to wish for Zeus to show her his true form, as proof that he really loved her. What Semele didn't know was that no mortal could gaze upon a god's true form and survive, sort of like looking at the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So when she asked Zeus to show her his true self, he could not refuse the request, and she was immediately engulfed in flame. Hell hath no fury like a goddess scorned. However, Zeus realized that Semele was pregnant with his child. Rather than sacrifice his offspring along with his beloved, Zeus magically moved the fetus from Semele's soon-to-be torched womb and into his own thigh. Listen, your stomach, your thigh, Greek gods just stuffed kids wherever. It was from Zeus's mighty thigh that baby Dionysus eventually emerged. No wonder he needed to get drunk all the time. In another tale, Zeus impregnated a mortal woman named Metis, but then heard of a prophecy issued by the oracle of Gaia that Metis' second child would be a boy who grew up to overthrow the king of the gods. Fearing the worst and prone to overreaction, Zeus devoured Metis whole, along with her unborn child. He learned this trick from his pops. Foolproof? In theory, but not long after, Zeus began experiencing crippling headaches. After other gods used a wedge to break open his skull, they discovered the problem. A fully grown female warrior, already dressed in armor, was living where the god's brains were supposed to be. This was Athena, the goddess of wisdom and intellect, and she was literally living in Zeus's head rent-free. Maybe don't swallow the next problem child, Zeus. So what do you think? What's the most bananas story from ancient Greek folklore? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.